Basics of Gait Part 3. In Part 2, we dove into the reflexes and reactions that the nervous system employs to maintain balance in an upright posture. But what really is an upright posture? How does the brain know what standing up is? In this video, we will explore the concept of an internal postural schema, which can be boiled down to what the brain thinks it feels like to be in a given posture. We will talk about the neural networks that allow for this idea to remain manifest, and end with the neurologic systems that feed into the brain and allow it to update information on what the body is doing. Parts 3 and 4 are denser than parts 1 and 2, but I hope you will stick with it as we expand on the concepts we've learned so far and take our understanding to the next level. Let's start here. Internal postural schema is a new foundational concept that I'd like to explore. The reflexes and reactions of Part 2 are only relevant when there is a state that the nervous system is trying to reach. In this case, it is an upright standing posture. But there are a massive number of particular head, trunk, and limb positions with an equally large number of potential perturbations. Rather than recognize and memorize each of these states individually, the nervous system develops a predetermined schema for what the correct orientation, position, and motion of the body should be with regard to the external environment. Note that I am purposely using the term a nervous system and not just brain. Remember, in Part 2, we discussed reactions and reflexes that do not require a synapse in the brain. The spinal cord is important and complex in itself, more on this later. Remember this cycle from Part 2. The processing portion here is where the inputs get turned into a concept of what the current postural state is, then compared to the desired postural state. Based on this, an output of muscle contractions to reach the desired postural state is done. The internal postural schema is constantly updated to take into account different situations and expectations, fine-tuning anticipatory and reactive postural reflexes. As you can see, postural adjustments are much more complex than just a simple if this goes in, then this must go out calculation. Let's go back to this figure, which is dizzyingly complicated compared to what we have seen so far. It helps to break it down into broad concepts rather than attempt to follow the maze of interconnected arrows and colors. Think of this as a layer deeper than our main idea, with each color and label representing a neural network and/or structure that participates in the maintenance of an upright posture. Again, try not to focus on all of the words right now, instead appreciate the concept of a constantly changing series of muscle contractions elicited by a flow of information that is updated via a steady stream of multimodal sensory information. The rest of the video will be dedicated to expanding on these sensory inputs. We start with vision, a sense that is supremely well developed in humans. It is especially tuned towards detail, color, and recognition compared to the raw distance and low light specialization of some other animals. Even the basics of vision could be a multipart series in itself, so we will focus on just a small portion of intermediate to high-level visual processing. Here we have a depiction of basic visual pathways in the brain, from the eyes on the lower left, to the thalamus and midbrain tectum, to the cerebral cortex. Though fascinating, we will ignore everything except these two pathways. The ventral pathway is predominantly associated with object recognition. It is also called the what pathway. In gait and postural control, it can help understand the external environment and plan movement with respect to objects. For example, if you see a rock in your path, you can anticipate the postural adjustments required to avoid falling over it. The dorsal pathway is associated with spatial awareness. It is also known as the where pathway. In gait and postural control, it helps in determining distance from objects with relation to body parts, target acquisition, error correction, and rapid obstacle avoidance. Seeing and recognizing a rock in your path must be coupled with distance perception so that your body adjusts at the right time. If you can imagine trying to take an extra step down the stairs when there are none left to take, you can appreciate the importance of timely and accurate postural adjustments. Let's move on now to the next sensory modality that provides information necessary to maintain an upright posture: The inner ear contains structures important for both hearing and balance, the latter of which is our focus for this video. This figure depicts the components of the vestibular apparatus in the inner ear. It is important for keeping light on the retina in a specific place, stabilizing gaze and head motion. This is a busy figure. For our purposes, note the three semicircular canals. They are oriented in the three primary directions of space. Think X, Y, and Z axes. Note also two otolith organs, the utricle and saccule, oriented perpendicular to each other. Angular acceleration of the head generates motion of the endolymphatic fluid within the canals. This displaces a structure called the cupula, which deforms the associated hair cells and causes the sensory endings to fire. This provides a sense of self-motion and helps to modulate postural reflexes. Similarly, the orientation of the utricle and saccule allow for precise perception of head position with relation to gravity and bodily movement. The utricle is oriented perpendicular to the line of gravity, so its hair cells respond preferentially to head movement when the head is tilted with respect to gravity. By contrast, the saccule is oriented parallel to the line of gravity, so its hair cells are preferentially activated during vertical accelerations of the head. We transition now to sources of sensory information from the skin and musculoskeletal system, known as ascending somatosensory pathways. The skin contains different types of receptors specialized to different types of sensations, from light touch to deep pressure to pain and temperature. For gait and posture, these provide information such as what type of surface you are on and how you should adjust accordingly. Muscles, tendon, and ligaments also contain sensory receptors that provide information on how much tension the muscle is exerting, the length of the muscle, and what position a joint is in. For gait and posture, these allow for precise adjustments to limb position based on their current state. There is much to discuss here, but we will focus on the neural pathways and not the details of these receptors in this series. The first somatosensory pathway we will discuss is the dorsal column pathway. So named for the way neural signals travel from the limb to the dorsal columns of the spinal cord on their way up to the brain. This pathway is also known as the medial lemniscal pathway, because the major bundle of axons, also known as a white matter tract, traversed in the brain is known as the medial lemniscus. This is the fastest conducting somatosensory pathway, transmitting signals from the muscle, skin, and joint position receptors we discussed previously. Its speed allows for rapid transfer of information from body to brain, and thus rapid postural adjustments can be made accordingly. This information is typically accessible to the conscious mind. We move on to the spinocerebellar pathways, of which there are two. These primarily transmit sensory information that remains at the unconscious level. The anterior spinocerebellar tract receives convergent information from joint position and skin receptors. Cells in this tract are special in that they are actively modulated by descending information from the brain and vestibular system. This bidirectional communication allows for highly accurate and modular postural adjustments, especially during purposeful actions. Think of the balance changes needed to maintain an upright posture while throwing a baseball. The posterior spinocerebellar tract receives inputs from muscle spindles in addition to joint position and skin receptors. There are two special features that set it apart from the anterior tract. First, cells here are not modulated by any additional processing at the level of the spinal cord or brain. While this may lead to less modularity, it allows for sensory information to remain segregated. Second, joint position and skin receptor information is somatotopically organized to the level of the cerebellum. This means that a cell carrying information from the top of the left wrist will communicate exclusively with a cell in the cerebellum that corresponds to that location. A signal from the bottom of the right foot will communicate with a bottom of the right foot cell and never directly communicate with that left wrist cell. This segregation of sensory information allows for a highly precise system that can feed into anticipatory and reactive postural responses. The final ascending pathway we will discuss here is the spino-reticular tract. This pathway transmits information from joint position and pain receptors. Neurons from the spinal cord synapse onto the reticular formation, which is a net-like region composed of many small collections of cells going to various parts of the brain. For our purposes, this tract helps contribute to postural reflexes, and its hallmark is making postural adjustments in response to pain. We have now completed our journey into the ascending sensory systems that provide information to the nervous system relevant to postural control. These systems provide information about the outside world and its relation to the body. In Part 4, we conclude the series by exploring the descending pathways that actually make the postural adjustments using the information provided by the ascending tracts we discussed here. Remember that this topic is dense, and we are only scratching the surface of these pathways. The goal is to provide a general overview in a digestible fashion. As always, thank you for watching.